Laurel and Hardy made millions laugh for decades. They were Hollywood's golden boys, filling theaters worldwide. But behind the smiles was a dark secret. Despite earning millions for studios, Stan Laurel died with just $2,000 in his bank account. Oliver Hardy lost everything to gambling addiction and expensive divorces. The duo who created comedy gold never owned a single film they made. Studios got rich while they struggled to pay bills. This is how America's favorite comedians had been completely betrayed. Arthur Stanley Jefferson, later known as Stan Laurel, was born on June 16, 1890, in the small town of Ulverston, Lancashire. His father, Arthur Jefferson, was a well-known vaudeville impresario, playwright, and manager who ran several theaters across northern England. Life was not easy for the Jefferson family. A census from 1891 shows that they often had to take in other actors as boarders, squeezing into small rooms to save money. His mother, Madge, was also a performer, but variety shows rarely paid more than the wage of a laborer. Still, Stan's childhood was filled with the world of theater. He grew up watching rehearsals from behind the curtains and playing in prop rooms while other children his age were sent to workhouses. 2 years later, on January 18, 1892, Norville Hardy was born in Harlem, Georgia. He would later be known to the world as Oliver Hardy. His life began with tragedy, as his father died before he was even a year old. His mother, Emily, ran a hotel to support the family in a South that was still struggling after the Civil War. Times were difficult, with outbreaks of yellow fever and high infant mortality rates. Emily even had to string barbed wire around the clotheslines to keep goats away. The boy, nicknamed Babe because of his round cheeks, found comfort at the local theater, where he would sit for hours watching silent comedies. By the age of 8, he was already singing with minstrel troupes, earning a little money to help his family. Friends later recalled seeing him visit his father's grave alone, a quiet child whose laughter would one day mask the sadness of his early loss. Stan's father was not only a theater manager, but also a leading figure in the English showbiz world. By the time Stan was 6, he was already living a backstage life most children could only dream of. He spent nights in theater lofts, doodled in prop rooms, and watched great performers like Vesta Tilley rehearse. In 1897, when his father leased the Metropole Theatre in Glasgow, young Stan threw himself into stage life. He helped with scenery, put on blackface for minstrel shows, and practiced routines when he was supposed to be studying. His school reports often noted his lack of focus, since he preferred comedy to lessons. By the age of 15, he had already written his own sketches and was performing as Stan Jefferson in pantomimes. By 1906, he was earning money as a comic actor, while many of his classmates had never even set foot on a stage. Oliver Hardy, meanwhile, showed surprising talent as an athlete in his teenage years. At Georgia Military College around 1907, he excelled in football and even showed promise as a baseball pitcher, with some believing he could make it to the major leagues. He was also a strong swimmer, once credited with saving 2 children from drowning in Sweetwater Creek. Though his mother hoped he would become a lawyer, Oliver enrolled at the University of Georgia, largely to wear the red and black jersey of the team. His grades, however, were poor. He often skipped lectures for band practice and even slept in the locker room. His dreams of stardom eventually led him to perform as a singer in silent movie theaters, a step that would change the course of his life. In 1912, Stan Laurel, then 22, got his big break when he joined Fred Karno's London Comedians. He had been on the edge of starvation when he encountered Karno in Leicester Square. Karno was famous for demanding perfection, with rehearsals that could last up to 8 hours a day. Stan became the understudy for Charlie Chaplin, sharing a tiny bunk with him during the troupe's voyage to America on the SS Cairnrona that October. During the U.S. tour, they performed the sketch Mumming Birds more than 700 times, sometimes 3 shows in a single day. When Chaplin could not perform, Stan stepped in, battling nerves before tough American crowds. He stayed in America until 1927, carrying with him the relentless discipline and comic timing that would later define his career. Around the same time, Oliver Hardy's path took a sharp turn. In 1910, his mother opened the first movie theater in Milledgeville, Georgia, and Oliver took on every job, selling tickets, running the projector, cleaning, and managing. Instead of studying law, he watched every silent film that came through, sometimes viewing the same one 40 times. By 1913, convinced he could do better than many of the actors on screen, he moved to Jacksonville, Florida, which was then a booming center for silent film with nearly 30 studios. There, he worked as an extra during the day and performed in vaudeville at night. His first professional film, Outwitting Dad, was released in 1914. By 1915, he had already appeared in 50 short films for the Lubin Studio, a remarkable start for someone who only 2 years earlier had been running a small-town theater. Stan's early solo career in American films was far from successful. Between 1917 and 1921, he starred in several silent shorts that failed to impress audiences, such as Nuts in May in 1917 and Phony Photos in 1918. Critics dismissed his performances as uninspired and too similar to Chaplin's. He became the subject of jokes in trade papers, and his parody, The Lucky Dog in 1921, in which he starred, gained little attention at the time. Many of these films are now lost, surviving only through payroll records. Laurel struggled with being typecast and felt overshadowed by Chaplin. It was not until Hal Roach brought him into the studio in 1926 that his career began to recover. Oliver, on the other hand, built a huge body of work, though most of it went unnoticed. Between 1914 and 1926, he appeared in more than 250 silent shorts for studios like Vim and Lubin. The pace was exhausting, with some weeks demanding up to 4 films. Around 150 of his films are now lost to nitrate decay and poor storage. He was often cast in secondary roles, or as the Heavy, his large frame making him a natural choice for physical comedy. He even played the Tin Man in the 1925 silent version of The Wizard of Oz, a film now largely forgotten. Despite all this work, Hardy's name rarely appeared on posters, and his fame remained out of reach until Hal Roach paired him with Stan in 1927. Curiously, the two men had already crossed paths years earlier. In December 1921, they appeared together in a silent comedy, short called The Lucky Dog. Laurel played a down-on-his-luck man, while Hardy played a clumsy mugger. Historians later determined that the film was shot in late 1920 or early 1921, using evidence from trade papers and car registrations. At the time, it made no mark on their careers. In fact, both later admitted they had no memory of the encounter at all. It would be 6 more years before they officially teamed up, an astonishing gap considering the perfect chemistry they would one day share. In 1926, Hal Roach Studios in Hollywood was buzzing with talent, but a chance overlap created something unforgettable. Stan Laurel had just been rehired, not as an actor, but mainly to write and direct short comedies. At the same time, Oliver Hardy, known as Babe, signed on as a performer. Neither man knew that this timing would lead to one of the greatest comedy teams in history. At first, they worked on separate projects in Roach's All-Stars series. Slowly, they began appearing in the same shorts, and audiences noticed the way their different personalities played off each other. Hal Roach later admitted that it all happened by accident, saying it could never have worked if the three of them hadn't met at the right time and place. The real turning point came thanks to director Leo McCarey. While working with them on ensemble projects, he saw something that others missed. Whenever Laurel and Hardy shared a scene, the comedy seemed effortless. Laurel's childlike innocence clashed perfectly with Hardy's frustrated and bossy nature. McCarey decided to focus on this chemistry, writing gags that placed them together instead of apart. He even turned his irritation with a badly tied bow tie into a routine where Hardy struggled with his own. Under McCarey, their comedy slowed down from the frantic style of the time, letting character and timing carry the laughs. Many credit him as the first to truly see that they were stronger as a team than as individuals. On December 3, 1927, their first official film as a duo, Putting Pants on Philip, premiered. The short featured Stan as a Scottish bumpkin in a kilt, constantly embarrassing his straight-laced uncle, played by Hardy. The film had plenty of slapstick moments, from inflated kilts to frantic city chases. While it wasn't yet the exact style that made them famous, it was the beginning of their iconic double act. Over the next few films, they shaped the characters audiences came to love, turning simple routines into some of the most memorable moments in comedy history. Behind the camera, Stan Laurel became the driving force. While Hardy enjoyed time off at the golf course, Laurel poured himself into every detail. He wrote scripts, planned gags, directed scenes without official credit, and spent long nights reviewing film reels. By 1929, he was recognized as the head writer and creative leader. His perfectionism set the tone, with Hal Roach admitting that if Laurel rejected an idea, it was immediately dropped. Laurel's endless effort, often to the point of exhaustion, gave their films the rhythm and humor that made them stand out. Their success came quickly. By the end of 1929, less than 2 years after their debut, they were already known worldwide. Their theme song and faces were recognized everywhere that had a cinema. Their comedies were huge hits in Europe, even before many theaters had sound. To reach more audiences, they filmed versions in French, German, Spanish, and Italian, often repeating the same scene 4 times in different languages. Their physical humor needed no translation, which helped make them global stars in record time. By the early 1930s, their talkies were drawing massive crowds in cities like Paris, Berlin, Madrid, and Shanghai. In less than 24 months, they went from near unknowns to international icons. Even as their fame grew, Laurel maintained almost complete control over the creative side. Though directors were credited, Laurel supervised the writing, oversaw the gags, and even re-edited films to get the perfect timing. Hal Roach confirmed that Laurel's word was final. He often had his writing team compete to improve jokes, always pushing for something funnier. While Hardy stayed out of the planning, Laurel worked tirelessly, shaping every detail. Many historians now agree he was the true director behind the scenes, though he rarely received the credit. In 1932, they reached a new milestone with The Music Box. The story, centered on delivering a piano up a long flight of stairs, earned them Hollywood's first Academy Award for Best Live-Action Short Film on November 18, 1932. The award itself was a parchment scroll, not a statuette, and officially went to producer Hal Roach. Still, it was a remarkable honor. The staircase used in the film still stands today in Los Angeles as a historic landmark, a reminder of their lasting impact. Between 1927 and 1940, Laurel and Hardy created 60 shorts and 16 feature films in just 13 years, an incredible 76 productions. That was nearly 6 per year, far more than most comedians of the time. Some of their best-known works from this period include Big Business in 1929, Sons of the Desert in 1933, and Way Out West in 1937. To maximize profits, they sometimes filmed in multiple languages, reading lines phonetically from cue cards. Their relentless schedule made them one of Hollywood's most productive partnerships ever. But success didn't mean an easy life. During the 1930s, Oliver Hardy developed a growing gambling problem. He also went through several marriages, each ending with expensive alimony payments. By the 1950s, both men were far from wealthy, and Hardy even agreed to a difficult live tour in England to pay off debts, though his declining health cut it short. He spent his later years in a modest home in the San Fernando Valley, a far cry from the glamorous life people imagined. Despite all their films' huge profits, the two never shared in the ownership or long-term earnings. They were paid fixed weekly salaries, no matter how successful their movies were. In 1936, Hardy earned $8,600 for the year, while Laurel made $135,000. Though those were large sums at the time, they were small compared to the millions their films generated. By the end of their careers, Laurel once admitted he had just $2,000 left in his bank account, a shocking truth behind their fame. Laurel's perfectionism sometimes pushed projects to the edge of collapse. During Babes in Toyland in 1934, he clashed heavily with Hal Roach, rewriting scenes while filming was already underway. Entire schedules fell behind while he tested and retested new gags. Though the delays frustrated the studio, his attention to detail ensured the duo's films stood apart from the rest. Hal Roach, however, kept control in clever ways. He arranged their contracts so that they never expired at the same time. This meant they could never bargain together for better pay or creative rights. If one contract ended, the other was still locked in, leaving them little leverage. This strategy gave Roach all the power and created tension in their partnership. Things came to a head in 1937 when Stan Laurel took the studio to court, refusing to work until he gained more control. Roach responded by firing him and pairing Hardy with Harry Langdon in the film Zenobia in 1939. Fans were shocked, and many thought the partnership was over for good. Only after months of legal battles and the failure of Zenobia did Roach bring them back together. The episode hurt Laurel deeply, especially because Hardy had stayed with the studio and continued working without him. Many saw this as a betrayal, as the magic was clearly missing when Hardy performed with others. Laurel, left fighting for both his rights and their partnership, felt isolated. Meanwhile, Roach even planned a new series called The Hardy Family, replacing Laurel with actress Patsy Kelly and child star Spanky McFarland. Fans rejected the idea, and it never came to life. In 1940, at the very height of their fame, Laurel and Hardy shocked the world by leaving Hal Roach Studios. This was the place where they had built more than 70 comedies since 1926, films that had made them beloved across the globe. Stan Laurel in particular had enjoyed rare freedom there, shaping every gag, every line, and even the way scenes were filmed. Roach had delivered hits like Way Out West and Sons of the Desert, and audiences flocked to see them. But tensions had been growing for years. After the 1934 release of Babes in Toyland, Stan and Hal Roach clashed so bitterly that Roach vowed never to work directly with him again, even though they kept collaborating in name. By 1940, interference from the studio and bitter disputes over creative credit had become unbearable. After finishing Saps at Sea, the duo walked away, hoping for more artistic control. Ironically, their decision to sign with the major studios 20th Century Fox and MGM would strip away the very freedom they were chasing. Their first big contract came in May 1941 with 20th Century Fox. At first it seemed like a step up, but the reality was crushing. For the first time in their careers, they were forbidden from shaping their own material. Scripts were handed to them on Fridays, and by Monday, they were expected to memorize every line exactly as written. Gone were the days when Stan functioned almost as a director, rewriting and improvising until the comedy felt right. Their first Fox films, Great Guns in 1941 and A Haunting We Will Go in 1942, showed how badly the formula failed. Without their creative touch, the spark disappeared. Laurel later said it was a complete shock to go from total involvement to being treated as nothing more than hired actors. The duo, who had once created some of the most inventive comedy ever filmed, now had no say in how their own movies were made. Fox and MGM did give them the largest budgets of their careers, often between $300,000 and $450,000 per film. A huge jump from the Roach years, but the money didn't improve the films. Instead of funding clever routines or imaginative slapstick, it went into producers' salaries, bloated supporting casts, and polished sets. Between 1941 and 1944, the pair made 8 features that together earned millions, but critics and longtime fans agreed they were their weakest work. Stan Laurel was so unhappy with the results that he later refused to watch these films, calling them artistically bankrupt. Even their look was tampered with. Studios added strange makeup and tried to update their style, leaving audiences confused. The bigger budgets had only bought mediocrity. Things sank even lower with The Bullfighters in 1945. By then, studios cared so little that they filled scenes with recycled footage, even borrowing shots from the Tyrone Power drama Blood and Sand. Old gags were lifted from their own earlier shorts, like Going Bye-Bye from 1934, while stock footage filled in the rest. When the film turned out to be a minor hit, Fox offered to reopen its entire B-movie unit just for them. But the offer felt like an insult. Rather than continue, Laurel and Hardy bought out their contracts, losing money just to escape the humiliation. Stan Laurel later admitted that the 1940s studio years were the worst period of our careers. In letters and interviews, he described feeling like a mere employee, stripped of the joy that came from shaping their art. He dismissed those films as meaningless compared to the genuine laughter of their Roach days. In his later years, he told fans not to watch the studio films at all, but to revisit the classics instead. He confessed that losing his creative voice had left him feeling helpless and useless. The decline wasn't only creative. In 1946, Laurel revealed in an interview with the New Statesman that he had just $2,000 left in his bank account and was surviving on $200 a month. It was shocking when you consider that for 14 straight years, Laurel and Hardy had filled theaters around the world and earned millions for studios. Yet the contracts they signed left them with almost nothing. They had been household names, yet they were living as if on a modest wage. Oliver Hardy's personal struggles made things worse. He developed a serious gambling addiction, often rushing from studio lots straight to the racetrack or card tables. Even while earning thousands per week, he could lose it all in a single night. By the late 1940s, the debts had become so heavy that he was forced to live in a modest San Fernando Valley home, far from the glamorous lifestyle people imagined. Both men also suffered through bitter divorces. Hardy was ordered to pay his ex-wife $250 a week, a massive amount at the time, and had to beg courts for reductions when his income fell below $1,000 a week. Laurel's serial marriages drained his finances with constant alimony payments and legal fees. Much of their later work was done not to build wealth, but simply to cover obligations that never ended. Adding to the cruelty, their films became television staples in the 1950s and 1960s, but their contracts gave them no royalties. As new generations laughed at their work, Laurel and Hardy earned nothing from the reruns. Studios and rights holders grew rich, while the men who had created the magic watched from the sidelines, struggling to pay their bills. By the late 1940s, they had no choice but to return to the stage. From 1947 through the early 1950s, they performed in small UK music halls, sometimes to half-empty rooms. The once great icons who could barely walk down a street without being mobbed now worked for just enough to cover food and travel. In 1954, during what would be their last tour, Hardy suffered a heart attack on May 17th after a show in Plymouth. The remaining dates were cancelled, and Laurel admitted he could not go on without him. It was the final curtain for their legendary partnership. Their last film, Atoll K, was supposed to be a comeback, but turned into a nightmare. Production began on April 1, 1950, in France, and dragged on for a full year. Language barriers crippled the set. The director barely spoke English, and both Laurel and Hardy fell seriously ill. Laurel, already diabetic, suffered colitis, dysentery, and a prostate ulcer that left him able to work only 20 to 30 minutes at a time. He underwent emergency prostate surgery twice and lost 50 pounds. Falling to just 114. Hardy's health was no better. His weight rose to 330 pounds, and he suffered a heart attack during filming. The $1.5 million production collapsed into chaos, and when the film finally came out in Europe in 1951, critics were horrified by the duo's frail condition. It reached the US only in 1954, and even then in a cut-down version. The reviews were brutal, and audiences knew this was the end. In May 1954, Oliver Hardy suffered a mild heart attack that left both his doctors and his fans deeply worried. The scare pushed him to take his health more seriously than ever before, and the results were startling. Over just a few months, Hardy lost more than 150 pounds, about 68 kilograms. The transformation was so dramatic that it changed the way he looked completely. Friends who had always known him as the jolly figure with a 350-pound frame were shocked. Even his partner, Stan Laurel, admitted that seeing him this way was unsettling. Some whispered that the weight loss must mean something worse, like cancer. It was as if Hardy had shed not only his size, but also the very image that had made him beloved. What began as an effort to save his life soon turned into a sign that his health might never recover. 2 years later, tragedy struck again. On September 14, 1956, Hardy was hit by a massive stroke. The man who had once filled theaters with laughter was left paralyzed and unable to speak. For months, he lay confined to his bed, dependent on the care of his devoted wife, Lucille. He suffered 2 more major strokes the following year, each one leaving him weaker than before. Eventually, he slipped into a coma. Visits from Stan Laurel, once so full of jokes and shared memories, became heartbreaking. Hardy could only communicate with his eyes, and Stan was left to watch his partner fade away, helpless to bring him back to the world they had built together. When Stan visited Hardy after the strokes, the silence between them was almost unbearable. For more than 30 years, they had shared a stage, crafted jokes, and perfected the art of making people laugh. Now, lying in bed, Hardy could not say a word. Laurel, always the talkative one on screen, found that words no longer mattered. They sat together quietly, sometimes with tears, sometimes with the faint trace of a smile. Their bond spoke louder than anything they could say. In those moments, they fell back on the same silent gestures they had used in their earliest films. It was a farewell that carried more weight than any scene they had ever acted. A final script that no audience would see, yet one that meant everything to them. On August 7, 1957, Oliver Hardy passed away at the age of 65 after finally slipping into a coma from the strokes. He had been forced to sell his house to pay for his medical bills and died with little left, despite a lifetime of success. A process server who came with legal documents refused to ask for his signature when he saw Hardy on his deathbed. At the very end, Lucille was by his side in their North Hollywood home. Stan, heartbroken and in poor health himself, could not bring himself to attend the funeral. Hardy's ashes were placed in the Masonic Garden at Valhalla Memorial Park Cemetery. And with his passing, one of the greatest comedy teams in history came to a close. When asked about Hardy's death, Stan Laurel said quietly, "That's the end of the history of Laurel and Hardy." He explained his absence at the funeral simply with the words, "Babe would understand," using Hardy's nickname. After that day, Laurel never appeared on stage or screen again. Offers poured in over the years from producers and Hollywood friends, but he turned down every single one. To him, performing without Hardy was impossible. He believed their stage had always been something they shared, and without his partner, it no longer felt right. In retirement, Laurel kept to himself, yet he was never idle. He spent his days at a neatly organized desk, writing comedy sketches, gags, and routines meant for the two of them, even though he knew they would never be performed again. He answered letters from fans with care and warmth, often surprising people with his generosity. Friends like Dick Van Dyke later revealed that Laurel never stopped thinking about comedy, but he refused to share it with anyone else. For him, it belonged only to Hardy. Stan Laurel died on February 23, 1965, at the age of 74. He had lived in a modest 3-room apartment in Santa Monica, avoiding public life because he did not want people to see him in a frail state. That afternoon, he suffered a heart attack. At 1:45 p.m., he passed away with his wife Ida and his nurse nearby. In his final moments, he still managed to deliver a line of humor. "I wish I was skiing," he said with a faint smile. When asked if he ever skied, he replied, "No, but I'd rather be skiing than doing what I'm doing." It was a quiet and almost playful end to a life that had given joy to millions. For nearly a decade, he had chosen solitude over the spotlight, holding on to the memory of a partnership that could never be replaced. With his passing, the last chapter closed on Laurel and Hardy, the duo who had once made the world laugh louder than anyone else.